All reading quiz. 9/18/2009. The Spy Hunt. There, cried Andy. What did I tell you, Mother? Miss Crawford continued. I think he's worse than a mere Tory. I think he's a Tory spy. Spy! Exclaimed the other. Someone is giving information about our troops. We're sure of that. We're having surprise attacks. And the number of English soldiers is always just a few more than our forces in that camp. Of course it's Johnson, cried Fire-Eater Andy. Can't you do something about it, Uncle James? We could if we knew he had dealings with some English soldier or spy. I don't see how you could ever find that out, said Miss Crawford. It would always be done secretly. If his house were watched, we might find out something, said Mr. Crawford. How could an English spy get to the Johnsons' house? Asked Robert. Our troops guard all the roads in this district. Peddlers and fur traders get through. I've seen them, said Andy. They could be spies, couldn't they? That's just what I fear, said Mr. Crawford. But there's no one here to watch Johnson. Every man is either in the army or doing some work for the army. I'll watch him, cried Andy. So will I, cried Robert. No, you're both too young, said Miss Jackson. Andy couldn't do it anyway. He's too reckless. He wasn't reckless in that Ottertail case, said Miss Crawford with a smile. Andy's got those rascals in jail. Indeed he did, said Aunt Jane proudly. I know, said Miss Jackson, but going on a man's property to spy upon him is different. And much more important, said James gravely. Elizabeth, I want the boys to watch that house. They might save the lives of patriot soldiers. Then, said Elizabeth Jackson sadly, I will give my consent. The Jackson boys suddenly discovered a new place to fish. And strange to say, it was in the creek back of the Johnsons' barn. For 2 days all went well. No one noticed them, and they didn't even see Mr. Johnson about. Nor did they see anyone going into the house. The third day, Mr. Johnson came down to the creek and asked why they were fishing on his place. Why didn't they fish in their own creek on their own place? This creek is deeper, said Robert politely. There's more shade, and the fish bite better. Besides, said Andy, the kind of fish we're fishing for we can't get in our creek. What kind is that? We call them Tories, said reckless Andy with a laugh. Why Tories? Asked the man sharply. Robert was frightened. What would his brother say next? Why, said Andy, because they're hard to catch. Then he laughed heartily at his own joke. But Mr. Johnson didn't laugh. He looked at Andy with suspicion. The fish are really called turnovers, said Robert. Well, isn't that what a Tory is? A turnover, said Andy. Boys, said Mr. Johnson, I think you better go, and you are not to come back. I do not want my creek to become a public fishing place. The boys left at once. Why didn't he want us there? Said Andy as we went home. There isn't another man around here who wouldn't let us fish on his creek. Maybe you shouldn't have said that about the Tory fish and turnovers. Why not? If he had been a patriot, he'd have laughed. It shows what he is, I think. Uncle James thought the same thing. It shows which side of the fence he's on, and it's not our side. Now I want you boys to go on watching him. Go at night, just after dark, and hide in the bushes across the road. We'll go tonight, cried Andy, and don't you worry, Mother. I won't be reckless. I won't talk at all. I'll whisper. Night after night, just after dark, Robert and Andy walked 2 miles to the Johnson place and hid in the bushes across the road. Nothing happened. Every night the Johnsons and their 2 children went to bed early. They burned 1 candle only, and that was put out soon after the boys arrived. After a week of this, Robert was ready to quit. Maybe Johnson really believes we ought to have a king, he said. Maybe that's all there is to it. In that case, he'd be making his own living, wouldn't he? If he is, what does he do? He isn't farming. He hasn't any stock to speak of. Only a horse and cow, said Robert. He says he's a trapper, but did you ever see his furs? Asked Andy. No, said Robert, I never have. Neither has anyone else, said Andy. I've been asking around, and just as sure as my name's Andrew Jackson, he's getting money from the English army. He's selling them information about our troops. I believe you're right, Andy. Let's keep on watching. Just 2 nights after that, the boys saw a horse hitched to Johnson's fence. It's not Johnson's horse, said Robert. Looks like a visitor, Andy. They're burning more candles, too. Look at the light on the paper window, said Andy. Must be somebody important. Yes, even a peddler or a fur trader, said Andy. Rubber, I've got to look in that room. How? You can't see through that paper window. I'll dig out some clay between the logs. Enough for a peephole. Wait here. Then Andy was gone to the dark shadows around the house. Rubber was worried. What if the door was opened suddenly? What if they saw Andy? But the door didn't open. Instead, there was his brother again. He's an English officer, Andy whispered. Come quick. The boys fairly flew over those 2 miles and before long Uncle James was hearing the news. He was dressed like a fur trader, but they called him Captain. I heard them plainly. I had my ear to the hole. Uncle James seized his musket and cap. I'll get help, he said. You boys stay here. Then he was gone. The boys tried to stay awake, but they couldn't. They stretched on the floor and were soon sound asleep. Miss Jackson put pillows under their heads and looked at them fondly. So young, she said, and already have gone through so much. Yes, said Aunt Jane, too much. In an hour or so, Mr. Crawford was back. Boys, wake up! Wake up! In an instant, the boys were awake and had jumped to their feet. We got him, cried Uncle James. He was a captain in the English army. We took him to our nearest camp, and the Johnsons were told to leave this country by tomorrow noon. Hurrah! Yelled the boys. Boys, the Patriot officers asked me to thank you. They're proud of you, said James Crawford, and I'm so proud of you, I'm ready to burst. Everyone laughed, and the spy hunt was over. The end.